Hello, hi, greetings everybody. Greetings. My name is Onya Sanu, whoopsies, and I am an organizer with the All African People's Revolutionary Party Southwest Chapter. I'm also here with my comrade Rashad. Hey Rashad.
How are you?
Hello. So this is our monthly Pan-African film series. We do these on the second Saturday of each month at the same time in the same place on our Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. Before the pandemic, we used to do this in person at the high school here, and it was really cute. I miss that. But this is cool because we get to be with folks all over the world, screen different revolutionary African films, films about socialism, films about decolonization, films about imperialism. I talk about it with y'all. So, this edition, the February 2022 edition of the Pan African Film Series, we are showing a double feature, two films about two revolutionary African women, revolutionary African working class women that made strong contributions to the struggles of our people in their own way. They were coming at it from different lanes, but they had the same objective, which was self determination and liberation for the masses of African people. So, first film we're going to show today is a documentary about Fannie Lou Hamer, member of the executive committee of the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party, which you're going to learn about in the film. Also, a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She was recruited by SNCC. Also, someone who met Sekou Touré in person on a SNCC delegation to Guinea, because Sekou Touré paid for SNCC organizers, including Fannie Lou Hamer and John Lewis and many others, to travel to Guinea to learn about the African liberation struggle there. It's not going to be in the documentary, but we're going to learn about it. So all around, a great revolutionary African woman who made a strong contribution to the struggle for voting rights in the south of the United States. And then the second film that we're going to show today is an interview with former Black Panther Party member Assata Shakur, also a former member of the Black Liberation Army, a woman who was persecuted by the U.S. government for her contributions to our African liberation struggle. They locked her up. They tortured her when she was pregnant, but her comrades, the revolutionary movement, broke her out, helped her escape to Cuba, where she is living free to this day. Cuba is protecting her to this day. So what we're going to show is an interview that was conducted with her in the early 90s by another revolutionary African man, just talking about her politics, talking about life in Cuba, talking about what she sees going on in the United States and what we need to do about it. So all around, a strong interview. And then after we show those two films, which together is around 50 minutes, we are going to have a discussion. Rashad and I and y'all are going to talk about what we just watched, what we learned, compare and contrast the politics, etc., etc. So it should be a good time. So, yeah, anything you want to add, Rashad?
No, not really. But I'm just excited to watch the videos. I mean, I watch them already, but I'll watch them. Can't wait to watch them again. I love hearing them both speak like they both. I don't know. It's just the power in their voices and their actions and stuff like that. It moves me. So I love it. Yeah, can't wait.
Cool. All right, then, without further ado, I'm gonna share my screen. We're doing this like lower tech because my computer is old. It's old, so we're gonna do this from Zoom. I'm gonna share my screen, playing a YouTube video in Zoom, and hopefully it works a little bit better than the show did this week. And as always, if y'all have any issues seeing or hearing either of the movies, please let us know. Actually, let me do this a different way, so I'm sure that I'm doing it the correct way. Yeah, so if you have any issues hearing or seeing the films, please let us know in the chat and we will address. Otherwise, we will see you in 50 minutes for the discussion.
By the time I was 10 or 12, I just wished to God I was white, because they had food to eat, they didn't work, they had money, they had nice homes, and we would nearly freeze. We never did have food. We worked all the time and didn't have nothing.
We all lived on D. Marlowe's plantation, and Fannie Lou worked on the D. Marlowe's plantation. She worked there like 18 years.
The persons who worked on the plantations, the sharecroppers, could not leave on his or her free will. I call it neo-slavery because it was, in fact, slavery.
Miss Hamer, she was 44 years old and had never lived any place but on a plantation. And so she wanted to go. I mean, they were hostages, really. You know, they couldn't leave without approval of the plantation owner. And they didn't get much money, so they didn't have a lot of money to run away with. All of what they had accumulated were taken away from them by an overseer, a white overseer on the plantation, who poisoned their mules and destroyed their crops and disabled their automobile. But Miss Hamer, she was a very determined person, and she had been trying all her life to get away from the plantation.
The direction of Fannie Lou Hamer's life changed in August 1962 when the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, held a public meeting in nearby Ruleville.
I can remember in 1962, this lady named Mary Tucker. She and my mom was best of friends. And she told my mom that they was having a mass meeting at William Chapel Church. And she asked my mom, did she want to come? And they talked about, you know, how it was our right that we could register and vote. And they was talking about we could vote out people that we didn't want in office. I had never heard until 1962 that black people could register and vote.
And you can understand why. You got 70% of the population of the whole county black, and then you got nothing but white people in office.
So then they asked who would go down on Friday, which was the 31st, to try and register. So I went down. I was one of the person that said I would go.
And people were really nervous about this trip to try and register to vote, a hostile act directed at white supremacy.
I was on the bus, and everybody on there was afraid, even myself. White men in trucks were driving by, waving guns and yelling, you know, sentences at us. And so these people on the bus were kind of upset, and Fannie Lou Hamer started to sing.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.
She began to sing, This Little Light, and people calmed down and were ready to face whatever they had to face.
This little light of mine,
And just with the power of her voice, it was clear that she was easing the fear.
let it shine.
Well, it didn't take long for the registrar and other people to shut down the circuit clerk's office where you went to register to vote. And so now people had to go back home.
When they was on their way back home, they got stopped by the highway patrol. And the reason they got stopped, the highway patrol told them that the bus was too yellow. You riding a school bus, what other color's gonna be? Before she made it home, quite naturally, the registrar called DeMarlo and letting him know that Fannie Lou was down there trying to register to vote. And the landowner drove up. He said, you will have to go down and withdraw your registration or you will have to leave this place. And I didn't call myself saying nothing smart, but I couldn't understand it, and I answered in the only way I could and told him that I didn't go down there to register for him. I went down there to register for myself.
And he said that, well, you'll have to go. And so he pulled away, and she went back into the house, and after she and her family met, had a little meeting to decide what they were going to do. She would leave her husband and her two daughters on the plantation, and that she would leave so that they could bring in the crop so that they wouldn't owe the plantation owner any money.
Daddy took Mama to Miss Mary Tucker's house. On the 10th of September of 1962, my daddy felt some kind of way that Mama wasn't safe there. So we all got together, packed up some clothes, and he got my mom and took her to Sumner, Mississippi.
Mr. Hamer's premonition was accurate. That very night, the Tucker house was attacked.
The 10th of September is when they shot in that house 16 times, you know, to kill me.
On the bus trip to register to vote, Mrs. Hamer had caught the eye of civil rights organizers who then wanted her to attend a SNCC conference in Nashville.
Bob Moses called me and told me to go and find a lady who did the singing on the bus. I found her up in Tallahatchie County in a little shack, plantation shack. And I walk into the room. There's this wing-back chair with the back to the door, and pot-belly stove, coal burning red. And I said, Bob Moses sent me to get Fannie Lou Hamer. And she stood up and said, I'm Fannie Lou Hamer. I mean, ready to go. I mean, didn't know if I was a kidnapper or what. You know, never thought about that.
She left with him, and that woman been traveling ever since.
Mrs. Hamer's presence at the 1962 SNCC conference in Nashville, where you could see for the first time, you know, a local person from Mississippi reflecting exactly what you wanted to find in the rural South. It becomes clear we're dealing with somebody different. This is no submissive, docile, servile sharecropper. This is a woman of considerable strength.
When she stepped forward, I don't think anyone in SNCC realized how strong she was, and she may not have realized how strong she was.
And so Fannie Lou Hamer was just what we had been looking for, because she didn't wait around. I mean, she just got right to work continuously. We canvassing communities and encouraging people to go to the courthouse.
She said, because voting is your voice, you know, to decide on who you want to represent you or who you want to be your president.
On June 9th, 1963, Fannie Lou Hamer was returning by bus from a voter registration conference in South Carolina.
They stopped in Winona, Mississippi, and some of them wanted to use the bathroom, some of them wanted to get food. But at the time, she was still on the bus. And when she did decide, she seen them running out of the place, and she stepped off to see what was going on. And somebody told her to get back on the bus. But this highway patrolman hollered at somebody else, told, get that one there, which was my mom. And they took him to jail.
And I was beaten in jail till my body was just hard as metal. I'm suffering now with a blood clot in the artery to the left eye and a permanent kidney injury on the right side. From the time that I began working, I never had a mind to stop. But after that happened to me in Winona, then I knew that it wouldn't be anything that would stop me other than death.
In 1964, as a founder of the new Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, Fannie Lou Hamer ran for Congress.
Walked into the Secretary of State's office, and this white lady said, what you niggas want? Said, we looked at her, and then Ms. Hamer said, well, I want to run for Congress. And so she's surprised. She looked at us, And then she go back in there, she says, hey, y'all. So there's two niggas out here say they want to run for Congress. 10, 15 eyes are now on us, you know. And so we're standing there. And so she come and put this pile of papers on the counter and said, fill these out. Fannie Lou and I go out into the corridor up there and fill out the papers, bring them back. She says, okay, this is okay, but you need a cashier check, $500 made out to the Democratic Party Executive Committee. So we go out into the corridor to the phone booth, call the COFO office in here, and tell them that we need $500. They said, don't move, stay there. Somebody will be there with the money. Okay. Sit around a while, then a guy shows up with the check. We take the check into the office, give it to the lady, and start to leave. She said, hold it. So there's one more step. Said at the time the candidate qualifies, the campaign manager has to sign these papers, and she said this is the last day to qualify. It's 4 o'clock. We're going to shut this down at 4:30. And if you don't get this all in today, you're out of luck. You won't be able to run. Fannie Lou Hamer looked at me and she said, Mac, go in there and put your name on them papers and let's go home. I said, oh, Miss Hamer, come on now. You know, I don't know nothing in the world about being a campaign manager. She said, Mac, you know as much about being a campaign manager as I know about running for Congress. Put your name on the papers and let's go home.
In August 1964, Mrs. Hamer was a member of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party's delegation to the Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City.
Everybody knew that the state of Mississippi discriminated against black people, denied black people the right to vote. Everybody in the Democratic Party knew that the Democratic Party of Mississippi was an all-white and white supremacist party. They weren't even loyal to the Democratic Party. They came to the Democratic Party's conventions supporting Barry Goldwater, the Republican.
And they weren't registering really any black folks, really, because we were carrying hundreds of people. We carried over 1,000 people down there to make that application to register to vote. The right to vote was our whole reason for this, but we had to now, since we wasn't getting any place in Mississippi, we needed to now make the National Democratic Party put pressure on the local delegation to be Democratic. Our challenge before the Credentials Committee was to try to deny the credentials to the regular Democratic Party.
Mrs. Hamer spoke before the Credentials Committee in 1964 in Atlantic City to let the Credentials Committee know that the integrated delegation should be seated as opposed to the old white guard. But Mrs. Hamer was chosen to speak because of the fire that was in her spirit, because of her articulation, and really because of her eyes.
It wasn't too long before 3 white men came to my cell. One of these men was a state highway patrolman, and he said, we're going to make you wish you was dead.
When you looked into Mrs. Hamer's eyes, you knew she meant business. You knew that she had been through a lot, and just her very presence commanded respect.
I was carried out of that cell into another cell where they had 2 Negro prisoners. The state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro to take the blackjack. The first Negro began to beat. And I was beat by the first Negro until he was exhausted.
I was told that there were people on the Credentials Committee in tears when they listened to Mrs. Hamer tell her story.
After the first Negro had beat until he was exhausted, the state highway patrolman ordered the second Negro to take the black jacket. The second Negro began to beat, and I began to work my feet. And the state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro had beat to sit on my feet. To keep me from working my feet, I began to scream, and one white man got up and began to beat me in my head and tell me to hush. All of this is on account of we want to register to become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hook because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America? Thank you.
We thought we had the case won. We thought that we had come here and we were going to get the National Democratic Party to say, okay.
With Mrs. Hamer's testimony at that moment, without knowing, the kind of arm twisting that was going on in the background, the kind of threats being made by the White House, Lyndon Johnson's White House, it seemed as if, to me, there would be an actual vote permitted on whether or not to seat the MFDP. And my feeling was that if you got that vote, a majority of the convention would vote to seat the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party.
But behind the scenes, President Johnson and party leaders had no intention of allowing a vote by the full convention. Instead, they offered a compromise, allowing 2 members of the Mississippi Freedom Democrats to be recognized as delegates at large.
So they offered us that, what they call a compromise, 2 seats at large, really representing nobody. Some are wanting to accept the compromise, and most of the SNCC people are saying no, and they take us off into a little meeting where separating us to try to persuade us to accept this compromise. And so, and then Mrs. Hamer standing up and, just saying, we shouldn't do this. We are not going to do this. And then all of us, the delegates, vote with her.
So although at one level the challenge failed, that is to say that the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party was not seated, at another level, you have to acknowledge that the challenge changed the Democratic Party and in a sense changed the face of Democratic Party politics in the United States.
Shortly after the convention, Fannie Lou Hamer joined fellow SNCC activists on a trip to Africa.
She became really proud and more of statesmanlike. I think when she saw these African people and the way the leadership there, and she just kind of this lifted her.
It was just remarkable. I saw some of the most intelligent people, people, because I had never in my life seen, where black people running banks. I'd never seen nobody, behind a counter in a bank. I had never seen nobody black running the government in my life. So it was quite a revelation to me. It was I was really learning something for the first time, because then I could feel myself never ever being ashamed of my ancestors and my background.
After the 1964 elections, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party challenged the legitimacy of Mississippi's congressional delegation. Fannie Lou Hamer was one of 3 women who traveled to Washington to oppose the seating of 5 Mississippi congressmen.
For the opening vote, the black ladies are asked to stand, and they gave them a seat finally, in the back of the U.S. House of Representatives.
And that challenge allowed Fannie Lou Hamer, Victoria Gray, and Annie Devine to be the first black women to be seated on the House floor while the challenge was heard.
Despite her role in the national civil rights movement, Fannie Lou Hamer remained active in her local community.
She starts doing the most practical kinds of things and telling people, plant tomatoes. We're hungry. Plant beans, plant okra.
You know, back then people didn't have food. Halftime didn't have clothes. And when she would go to different areas up north, she would tell them that, you know, people down here in the South, they needed clothes, they needed food. And they would send boxes and boxes and boxes of clothes. Our front porch would be stacked up with boxes, with clothes.
I watched this lady sit out in her front yard and peel peaches and pears and put them up in jars and give them away.
We just thought, you know, if we had land to grow some stuff on, then it would be a help to us because, you know, living on the farm, on some plantation, they still don't give you a place to grow stuff. So we founded Freedom Farms in 1969, and we grew our own vegetables, you know, like butter beans, peas, okra, potatoes, peanuts, and then cash crop. The plan of the thing is that it can grow to produce enough that people just won't know what hunger is.
She had a component of that Freedom Farm called a pig bank, where she was able, through the National Council of Negro Women, to accumulate some pigs. If a family came in and they were willing to take a piglet and raise this piglet, and then when this piglet got grown and had pigs, they would bring a piglet back to the bank to replenish the bank so that she could give more people.
Mrs. Hamer looked out for Ruleville, for Sunflower County, and she shared whatever earnings she received so often with people in the community.
She would buy lots so their house could be built on that lot.
She believed that a family ought to have a house, they ought to have education, and they ought to have food and a job.
I couldn't just afford to sit down and not do nothing. And I know something out there is happening, you know, and I know I can say something and say, you know, this is not right, and I'm going to get out here and we're going to do something about it.
Indigenous leadership, you know, part of them. And you think about a person running for Congress sitting out in the yard shelling peas.
She was able to encourage us to keep on moving. She was able to inspire and encourage us from her own physical pain.
And she will go down in history as one of the greatest folk leaders that this country has ever produced.
She was an awesome person. Whether she was cooking, whether she was singing, or whether she was trying to get somebody to go to the polls and register. But whatever she did her part. And I say this, she was an awesome woman. I loved her. I still love her. I miss her. Can't get no better than that.
Fannie Lou Hamer died on March 14, 1977. She was 59 years old. Her good friend Charles McLaurin arranged for her burial on land she owned.
The reason she's buried where she's buried is that a few days before she passed away, and I went to visit her, and she said, Mac, promise me I will not be buried on a plantation. I've been on a plantation all my life, and I don't want to be buried. We have a commitment to keep her legacy alive. The statue was one way that she'd always be standing tall in the Delta. We'd set it up as high as it's setting so that people who come to the statue will be looking up at her.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
So my first question would be, is what political ideology do you embrace at this time?
Well, that's a wide question. But essentially, I'm an African woman who believes in freedom and justice, social justice, political justice, economic justice for all people. I believe in that oppressed people, wherever they are, have the right to self-determination. I believe that socialism is an integral part of building social justice on this planet. I believe that the priorities of this planet have to be completely changed. And instead of profits, instead of policies that destroy the earth, that destroy the water, that destroy human beings, I believe a policy that protects people, that makes people live in a community, a world community. That's what I believe. That's my basic political commitment at this moment.
I want to know, how did you arrive at this spot? Not physically, but what brought you to that conclusion and what brought you to Cuba?
Well, what brought me to that conclusion was in the process of struggling, I've also understood that part of struggling is learning, is studying. And my own experiences in the 60s led me to understand that it wasn't just enough to ask for a piece of the pie. That the whole liberation of oppressed people in the United States had to do not with climbing up some ladder to success, not for asking to be just like Rockefeller or just like DuPont or just like Ford, because that would only continue the oppression and exploitation of oppressed people in the United States, and specifically African people born and raised in the United States. So that I began to understand that more and more the condition of my people, my history, was very much connected with other oppressed people, and I began to see that the same foot that was on the necks of the Vietnamese people, that was on the necks of all oppressed people on the planet, was the same foot that was on my neck. And so I began to understand that imperialism has to go. It is a poison that is killing people all over this world. And I became more and more active, and as I became more and more active, the government became more and more repressive. And in the 1960s, the Black Liberation Movement was the #1 target of COINTELPRO. And the Black Panther Party specifically was targeted by J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI, and the CIA, and all of the repressive forces in the United States government. And so I was one of those young people who was targeted by COINTELPRO because I was an activist, because I was opposed to the United States government's policies, because I was opposed to racism. And so I ultimately had to go underground. I was ultimately captured based on being charged with false charges. I was captured. I was shot with my hands in the air. I was shot in the back. I was tortured, beaten. I was spent 2 years in solitary confinement in men's prisons because of my political beliefs. I was spent 6.5 years in prison in the United States, and what I learned about prison in the United States, that it's a new form of plantation, it's a new form of slavery. It's the United States is becoming more and more a police state in which prisons are nothing more than a concentration camp. Concentration camps. It's a euphemism to call what exists now in the United States prisons. They are concentration camps to contain people, to keep them from being productive, to keep them from having a say in their lives. And 1/3 of young black men right now are either in prison or under the so-called jurisdiction of the so-called criminal justice system. So I was one of those people, and lucky enough, I was part of a movement, and my movement helped to liberate me. So in 1979, after being sentenced by an all-white, convicted by an all-white jury, and sentenced to life in prison plus 33 years plus 30 days, I was able to escape in 1979, and in 1984 I was able to come to Cuba, and the Cuban people and the Cuban government welcomed me with open arms.
Everybody remember Malcolm. Nobody remembered he started off red. Everybody remembered George after Blood in My Eye. They didn't remember George before Blood in My Eye. What can we say to the community so they won't continue to abandon their young to a system that is corrupt?
I mean, what saved me from probably being either a puppet, a robot for that system, or being a drug addict, or just being destroyed by that system, was becoming involved, becoming politically involved, and studying. I will always say, and say to anybody, anywhere, anytime, any place, that being in our struggle has done more for me than I can ever do for the struggle of our people, so that I believe that anybody who wants to be sane and healthy on this planet has to understand that you cannot live at the bottom of a garbage can. and be happy. In order to be happy, you have to start to remove the garbage. And that means becoming active, that means becoming conscious, that means becoming aware, and that means studying and struggling and loving and becoming people. People who love people instead of being people who are alienated from other people, who are being used by the government. We have to learn a new way of living. We have to build communities, build a sense of community, build a sense of freedom, our own space where we can sit in peace and love. And I think all of that is a process. If you don't grow, then you're going backwards. So I think that you start out bit by bit, and little by little you work from wherever you are to do your bit to the liberation of oppressed people and to making this world somewhere that is livable.
We've heard a lot, and I've heard a lot from you in general when I was in the United States, of your clear support of the political prisoners.
Yes.
The questions that I haven't heard so clearly from other people is, what about that million? You know, can you delineate between the political prisoners, which they say there's 100 political prisoners and prisoners of war, them from the 1.5 million prisoners that they currently hold?
Both political prisoners and people who are victims of the political system are products of that repressive capitalist system. The difference between political prisoners and those who are victims of the politics of the United States government, the racist, at this point, almost fascist politics of the United States government, is that political prisoners are conscious. Political prisoners are conscious of the reasons for that oppression and are clearly struggling against the system. Mumia Abu-Jamal is on death row, not just because he's an African man, but because he is an African man that is capable of politicizing all of the people in the United States about the realities of the United States. He's capable of pulling the sheep's clothing off of the wolf and exposing the United States government as the vicious, hungry, greedy wolf that it is. And so I believe that it is most important for anybody who believes in justice, who believes that human beings have the right to be free, to struggle to free Mumia Abu-Jamal, to struggle to free all political prisoners and prisoners of war, and to struggle for a new political, economic reality in the United States where people have the right to live, have the right to be free, have the right to be free from repression, from being stopped and searched and thrown on the ground at will. I believe that it is important to free political prisoners so that we can all struggle to free ourselves.
Now, you know, what I'm searching for is how important it was for you to receive support in that 2-year period that you was in jail.
I think that I was in prison 6.5 years. And support made all the difference in the world. And I think that as communities, we have to understand that our position cannot be the same as the U.S. government's position. What they're saying is that these people are in prison, forget them, throw them out. They're worthless, low-life human beings. We're saying that these are human beings that have been victimized. They might have problems, they might be unconscious, and it is our job as a community to reach out to them, to say, we understand that you are a human being, we give you support, we give you love, we give you what we have, the knowledge that we have to share. I think that our communities have to be more and more involved in helping, embracing, educating, and providing support for those sisters and brothers who are in prison and preparing conditions so that they can come out and be useful not only to our communities but useful to our struggle for liberation. And I think that it's important for those sisters and brothers who are in prison to remember we are human beings. Do never let them dehumanize you. You in prison, you can be a father, you can be a mother, you can work to educate your children. In prison, you can work to educate yourself. Do not let anybody try to turn you into an animal. That those on the inside must understand that they are in there to grow. The United States government or the prisons cannot rehabilitate anybody, cannot educate anybody. They are criminals. How is a criminal going to rehabilitate somebody? So I think that we have got to educate ourselves and prepare ourselves to fight a repressive system, an oppressive system, and a system that smashes the human being to the point where people don't even remember how to take a walk, how to say good morning, how to smile at each other. We have to take this planet back from the beasts that are controlling it right now. I escaped from prison in 1979. And since 1979, the population of women in prison has tripled. Tripled. It boggles my mind, and it should boggle everybody's mind who understands mathematics. More and more. Poor women, because there are no rich women, no rich people in prison. So you're dealing with poor women, you're dealing with poor mothers, you're dealing with African, Asian, Latin American, and indigenous women who are in those prisons are being dehumanized, just snatched up off the street, given all kinds of time. And I think that it is important for women to be activists in dealing with women in prison and freeing women in prison and freeing women who are political prisoners, because there are quite a few women who are political prisoners. And I also think that the women's movement needs to deal with those women and to have outreach programs, support programs for those women who are in prison to help them be united with their children, with their families. Because what is happening is there are a whole lot of children out there that have no mother, no father, that are being just thrown out into the street. So I say that if you call yourself a woman that identifies with the liberation of women, then identify with the most oppressed, exploited women in the United States. I mean, because I'll be real with you. You know, one of the most, just raging pains that I had was being separated from my child, was being forbidden to hold her, to touch her, to breastfeed her. The conditions of women in prison in the United States is unbearable. I mean, I have seen women who have given birth and they have not been able to even see their children. Social workers can tell women if their children can visit them or not. I was in prisons where it was forbidden for children to visit. The Middlesex County workhouse where I was, it was pathetic. It tore your insides out. You'd see all these little children outside trying to scream and yell at their mothers. They couldn't see their mothers. It was the most frustrating thing, the most heartbreaking thing that I've ever seen. So I think that anybody who has any human sensibility, who has any commitment to women, needs to get involved in liberating women in prison, in providing support, education, job training, etc. for those sisters who are in prison. There's an effort to destroy our communities, to completely knock out any sense of community that we have. And so drugs, crack cocaine is being pumped up into our communities, and we do not have airplanes, yachts to bring that stuff in. It is being brought into our communities, and people are getting rich from it, and the same people that are getting rich exploiting people all over the world are getting rich, bringing cocaine, bringing drugs into the United States. And I think, and selling a kind of mentality that tells people you cannot function on this planet. So the only option you have is to go somewhere and drug out, get high, spend your whole life in a cloud, a death cloud. So I think that we have to more and more understand that it's not the number of women in prison is not an isolated phenomena. It is a part and parcel of a policy to tell people we don't care if you have health care, we don't care if you have education, we don't care if you have access to social services, we don't care if you have any safety net. All we care about is, will you buy our sneakers? Will you buy our dope? Will you buy our junk? Will you buy our chains, gold chains, silver chains, human chains, whatever kind of chains, they want to put it on you. And so I say that we have got to get rid of that consumer mentality. We have got to get rid of that mentality of being high and wanting to be high. And we've got to stop letting people put it in our communities. I look in magazines, I don't care what magazine it is, if it's for people of color, they got cigarette ads in there, they got billboards with Joe Camel and every other body, you know, trying to get us to get the mentality where we want to be hooked on something, where we can't live without something, and something that is detrimental to our health. So what we need to do is get rid of the million liquor stores in our community, get rid of the liquor ads, the cigarette ads.
Do you hear the call on the international community against the United States use of slave labor? Because I'm not hearing it inside the country.
Well, I mean, it's very hard to get the message out all over the world because the United States controls the media. And so we have to really work to let people know that in the United States, prisons are being turned into plantations. It's a new kind of plantation with a new kind of slave labor, but in my book, slave labor is slave labor. And so I think that we have to work to get that information out to people all over the world, because even though a lot of people understand that the United States government is an imperialist country, they do not understand how repressive, how racist, and how reactionary the United States is inside of the United States.
Within the United States, I feel like the left have somehow not developed a consistent theory surrounding the incarceration of human beings. I mean, they would save whales, they will jump over, save a tree, but when it comes to saving my ass, it's a whole different question.
You know, when you say the left, I think if you don't deal with the issue of prisons today, you're being left out of the left. Essentially, that's just like being in Nazi Germany and not dealing with the fact that there are all these people in concentration camps. There are concentration camps in the United States right now, and I believe that it is immoral. I don't care who you are, what your political beliefs are, whether you consider yourself left, whether you consider yourself progressive, whether you consider yourself part of the liberation movement of oppressed people, whatever your political beliefs are, if they are humanist political beliefs, then you have to deal with the question of people in prison, and you have to deal with the question of crime. You have to deal with the question of justice. But if we do not do it, then the right wing just runs with it and calls for law and order, and law and order to them means just locking people up. It doesn't mean eliminating the conditions that cause people to be in prison. It means eliminating the people. I think that young people need to find ways they can get together. I think they need to understand that they need to struggle right where they are. Deal with the issues that are stabbing them in the side, in the back, in the head, and deal from there. And then build a movement, whether it's at your job, whether it's on your block, whether it's in the prison you are, whether it's in wherever you find yourself at. You start dealing with getting the foot off of your neck. And I think that young people, whether you're in college or whether you're in prison, you need to do what you need to do to make the next century belong to the people, because this century has been 100 years more of slavery.
Conditions ain't right for you to return home, and we miss you. What can those sisters do to support you?
Well, I think that my liberation from exile, because I have been liberated from the belly of the beast, has very much to do with the need for us as a people to call for amnesty, immediate amnesty for all political prisoners and prisoners of war. Because what happened? The FBI admitted that it had a COINTEL program to neutralize activists. And they neutralized them in all kinds of ways: assassination, false imprisonment, false charges, etc. But they never admitted to who were the victims. Geronimo spent 27 years in prison before they ever admitted.
They still haven't admitted it.
That's right. But there was enough evidence, and the evidence has been out there for years before he got out of prison. Dhoruba bin Wahad spent 19 years in prison. Those prisoners have been in there a million times longer than they should have. And that's not 1 minute. So I say that there has to be a movement for amnesty of the victims of COINTELPRO, and that those who were victimized, spied on, harassed, etc., need to be completely set free, exonerated, apologized to, and brought back to their communities. I think that that movement is important, and it's important right now, because the government's so-called Freedom of Information Act was a sham.
There's nothing free about it.
No, not at all. I'm telling you that I got a box, and that was one of my files, and there were 33, a great big box like this, with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of papers, and 99% of it crossed out. How you gonna call that freedom of information? You know? So I think that we need to be serious about building a movement for amnesty right now for those political prisoners and prisoners of war. And I don't think yesterday is too soon. I just want to say, sisters, I love you. I'm so proud. Go out and multiply yourselves. Go out and get another sister. Go out and talk to anybody and everybody that you can to raise people's consciousness and to build a huge movement, not only to free political prisoners, but to free all of our people from the prison that is the United States of America.
Okay, are you back? Hello, perfect timing. All right, everybody. So that was double feature. First was a PBS documentary about Fannie Lou Hamer, talking about how she was brought into the movement, talking about her work within SNCC and the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party. Second was an interview with Assata Shakur, conducted in 1996, where she's talking about her politics, about political prisoners, about the necessity of resistance against this exploitative and barbaric system. So, yeah, let's talk about it. Rashad, what did you think of the films?
I like them both. Well, I mean, I like them both, obviously. But I don't know. To me, it's just it's crazy. It made me think about like, they're both coming at it from different angles in their fight against imperialism and the United States and stuff like that. But to me, it just highlights how interlocking the webs are. And so, at that time in the 60s and 70s, I mean, even now, there was a need to have to attack it from different angles and stuff like that because they're doing so many things, and can't really run for Congress, can't have the Democratic, can't have what you want in the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. You can't have what you want there. By that time, they're already sending drugs into the United States. You can't even talk about them doing that because then once you do, well, then you're a target too. So it's just, to me, it highlighted the fact that just how interlocking the webs are. And even though Assata was speaking later, and she had the benefit of being there later and seeing just how deep it got and how she talked about women prisons and how stuff had tripled like that. But it just was like a continuous thing, and the webs have been interlocking, and they've just been building this beast for so long, and that's what it made me think about.
Right. Agreed. And I definitely appreciated, Fannie Lou Hamer was approaching it from like a grassroots organizing perspective. They were trying to build an independent political party with the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party that did have an electoral strategy. They were trying to get African people the right to vote and representation within the DNC. However, what they had in common was like their shared focus on self-determination, of building independent political power. That's what the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party was about. That's what the Freedom Farm was about. And the pig bank was lit. Like giving people pigs, and then they raise the pig and they come back and they share it. Oh my God. But then if you look at like the work that the Black Panther Party was doing, that the Black Liberation Army was doing around like the medical programs, like the breakfast programs, they were doing the same thing. They were trying to like build independent political power and self-determination, like build solutions controlled by our people. So like you could see the same, like the shared political perspective in like the strategies that they pursued, Fannie Lou Hamer and Assata. So one thing about that documentary about Fannie Lou Hamer, so it was like not, it's not revolutionary. It was made by PBS. So it was interesting to me. There was like a couple, like the way that it was framed, there were a couple of things that stood out to me. First and foremost, they talk about her going to Africa, but they don't say where, and they don't say who they met with. Like Sekou Touré, who was president of Guinea at the time, who was like leader of the PDG that helped liberate Guinea from French colonialism. And that was the reason why Guinea was independent. And they went and they were like, wow, free African people building their own nation. That part's important, but because it was like a liberal documentary, they were like, we're just not gonna say Sekou Touré.
She went to Africa. That's it though. We'll leave it there.
Moving on. So it was just like, but yeah. So the important things to know about that trip that was like mentioned, and they did talk about like the impact it had on her. Like they had the clip of her talking about what it felt like to see African people building their own society, like playing a leading role. She talked about like working in banks, working in the government, and how like powerful it was for her to see that. But they don't talk about like what the trip actually was. So September of 1964, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was invited to visit Guinea as a delegation. The whole trip was paid for by the PDG. It was actually Harry Belafonte that linked up SNCC with the PDG. So the folks that were on that delegation, there were 11 of them, were Jim Foreman, John Lewis, Bob Moses, Donna Richards, Julian Bond, Ruby Doris Smith Robinson, Donald Harris, Bill Hanson, Prathia Hall, Matthew Jones, and Fannie Lou Hamer. So it was a group of 11 who traveled to Conakry September of 1964. They met with Sekou Touré. They attended various openings of institutions built by the PDG in Guinea. They toured some socialist projects like the Match Factory. So it was a pretty impactful trip. And it also has to be understood within the overall history of SNCC's internationalism. Because you have to realize at the time when they were working, there had been anti-colonial struggles in Africa for decades that had been successful, that were forming independent African states. So from the very beginning, the SNCC organizers identified with the revolutionary anti-colonial struggles that were happening in Africa. They were constantly making those links in their statements. They were one of the first internationalist organizations of that era. They were anti-Zionist, they were anti-imperialist. Many SNCC organizers went on to join revolutionary socialist organizations like the Black Panther Party, like the AAPRP. So yeah, you can tell why they kind of just brushed over that part. But I wanted to share that. And there's a really good website, sncdigital.org, which is basically an archive of history about SNCC. And so this link that I'm going to put in the chat is all about the delegation to Guinea, if folks want to learn more about it. But yeah, that was just very funny to me. How do you not say Sekou Touré's name when he paid for the trip? That's messed up.
And yeah, and the fact we all know how important the colonial struggles were in Africa. We all know to us here. And so for them to oh, she went to Africa and then not get at least a little bit, do something, but nah, okay.
Yeah, they couldn't. They could not talk about Sekou Touré. They could not. Okay, so yeah, so that's that. The other thing that stood out to me about, and it wasn't bad, they were telling the truth for the most part, just interested in what, it was interesting what they chose to highlight. So another thing that stood out to me was how they talked about her background, how she was a true representative of the masses of working class African people that she was seeking to organize alongside SNCC, that she was a representative of. Because especially nowadays, I feel when people talk about organizers, they expect a certain kind of credentials, a background in the nonprofit industrial complex, or degrees, or some weird training. But she was a person who was of the masses that she was seeking to organize. She was a person who understood what the grassroots was looking for and brought them along into the movement. She had no formal training and that kind of political work, but she was a natural organizer. They called her a folk organizer. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's to me. I mean, obviously, organizing in different places than where you're from and stuff like that is, there's nothing wrong with it. But I think it was in the Assata documentary where she was where you're at. She was you need to start working and organizing where you're at and stuff like that, and doing things that help the people that you're around and everything. And it helps. I know it helps when you see someone who is right down the block, like they said, shelling peas, Fannie Lou Hamer shelling peas. That's the person who is trying to lead your people into something better. And so that, to me, it's an easy way to connect with the people you're organizing and to I don't know, make the most of it, I guess to say, because you know them, they know you, and it's also a way to build trust and stuff like that, because you get to interact with these people every day and they see who you are outside of organizing and just kicking it when you're in I don't want to say the organizer is going to ever leave you, but when you're just at your house and stuff like that, just chilling. And so yeah, they get to see that side of you too, and I think that's important for us in the movement and stuff like that, when we get to really build connections with the people that we live with and stuff like that, and live around in our own community.
And that was definitely a massive part of the reason why she was so effective as an organizer for SNCC and the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party. Because yeah, she was people knew her, people trusted her, people would follow her, and she brought them along. So a model that we very much need to learn from. Actually, this morning we had the All Political Education Committee meeting within the AAPRP. So we have folks on the Political Education Committee all over the world. And this is the meeting where we all come together in one space and discuss the overall strategy for PE within the party. And the political education discussion we had in the meeting was exactly about this, about how it's not just enough to like read the books, have the theory, take the correct positions. You have to be working side by side along the masses of your people to like apply those ideas in real life. It's not enough to like think or say the right thing. You have to like do the thing. Like you have to do the thing. And I feel like people will just like sit in their room and like read and be like, I read this and that means you're all wrong. But they won't even attempt to apply the ideas they're reading about, to like test them out, to see if they even work. And they will certainly not even attempt to like build trust and relationships among the masses of their people that they say they seek to liberate. So like the example of Fannie Lou Hamer, especially not having that formal background, those like so-called credentials, is like very, very important to learn from, because she exemplified how important it is to build that trust and those relationships, and how much more effective we are at the work we're trying to do when we do that.
Yeah.
What else?
What did Kwame Ture say in one of these interviews? You say people like to think they're thinking just because, you know, people like to think they're thinking, but you're not really thinking unless you're doing what you have to do. You know, you think you're thinking. So yeah.
Another thing about this documentary that I found interesting was the way that they talked about like the physical violence that Fannie Lou Hamer experienced, the exploitation that Fannie Lou Hamer experienced at the hands of the system she was pushing back against, for the so-called crime of standing up. Like she obviously famously gave that speech at the Democratic National Convention, where she talked about the experience of being arrested for organizing around voting rights and building independent political power, and how she was beat up in prison by African men that had been paid by the cops to do it. And so she shares in great detail what had happened to her for like standing up for her people, rising up for her people. And it's like it was a historically extremely impactful moment because it was aired on TV. A lot of people saw it and they were like shocked at the brutality. But it was like interesting because it's interesting for two reasons. One, because there's like a part in the documentary where they're like, she taught so many people with her pain. And I was like, I don't know, it like bothered me. But what do you think about that?
Yeah. And it's because it's bullshit that like that's the way you got to learn. We have to teach people through our pain, and specifically through Black women's pain, because that's the shit to me. I think America like feeds off of that shit, like, and it's like it's disgusting to me. And so like but that's the way they see us. That's the way like, you know, oh my God, like it's only the pain that like makes us, I don't know, like here and like relevant and stuff like that. Oh, because they went through pain, and that's, you know, they're good for that, and you know, we can learn from that instead of like just knowing the fact that it's bullshit. The whole system, the way it's set up, it's wrong in general. It doesn't, you know, I don't need to get beaten for you to know that. For you to know that me just like getting my people to try and go vote and getting arrested for that alone, or getting our bus getting stopped because it's too fucking yellow, that's nonsense. So like you should know that and just off rip. I shouldn't need to get beaten by my own people who were paid by the cops for you to feel that like to want to change some shit. So
yeah. And someone just made the comparison to like what happened with the murder of George Floyd. That was like a viral video, which is wild to me. Every time an African is killed and like the video goes viral, I'm like, this is a barbaric, disgusting society. But yeah, people would say George Floyd's death changed the world. Joe Biden said that. What did he say? He was like, George Floyd's death had a bigger impact than MLK's assassination. I was like, Jesus Christ, why are you so saying things like that? But yeah, there is an immense amount of violence against African and colonized people built into like the day-to-day functioning of this system. And yet people accept that. Like they accept the violence that African women experience incarcerated. They accept the violence that African youth experience day to day in the schools. They accept the violence that our people experience in our communities. They just accept it. They accept the violence in Africa. They just accept it. They see it on the news. They're like, huh, and they move on. But there's like these moments where they're like forced to look at it, and it's like weird. This like contradiction, because they know what's happening otherwise. But in the moments where they're forced to look at it, whether it's with like Fannie Lou Hamer's testimony at the DNC, or whether it's like the video of George Floyd being strangled to death, basically, that all of a sudden they're like, oh, that's messed up. But like, you're just like, why does there have to be like a lynching postcard for you to like be like, this should not be happening? And then why is it that you can react to that particular viral moment and have some feeling of a sense of decency, but not like question why so much violence is necessary on a consistent basis for the system to exist in the first place? Like, why? Like, I don't understand.
Exactly. It just, and it's crazy because, like you said, it's like a complete contradiction because they know what's going on, and then but somehow seeing it. And I get it. I mean, it's visceral and stuff like that too. But like, I don't know. Like, lynching is lynching, and so people getting shot by the cops, a life was taken, and so that to me is where it should be enough. Like I don't need to see want my people getting murdered or someone else getting murdered to know that like the cops or someone else took someone's life, and that's not okay. So, like, but that's like what I think the since the inception of this country, that's what the white folks have, like, that's what they do. That's what they fed off of from the very outset of this country. That's what they fed off of us, of our pain, of our suffering, in one way or another. Even if they were supposedly against it, most of the white people in this country, that's what moves and stuff like that is, in for better or for worse. So yeah.
You're sometimes you're very clear, but sometimes your audio gets muffled. I'm not sure if like you're the we'll see. But I can hear you the whole time. Just sometimes it's very muffled. But yeah, so I absolutely agree. It's also, I think a big part of it is like the society of spectacle that capitalism created. Like Assata talks about it, how we are pushed to consume a very toxic culture. We are forced to consume things that are like harmful for us. Like the media that's pushed on us is telling us like do drugs, drink alcohol, party, be misogynistic, be queer and trans antagonistic, be as materialist as possible. Like just get more stuff, get as much stuff as you want, and that means you're going to be successful. It pushes like an individualist mindset, but it also pushes like a voyeuristic kind of approach to engaging violence, where people are almost like titillated by it. Like they'll see Fannie Lou Hamer giving her testimony at the Democratic National Convention, and there's like a part of them like that's bad, and there's a part of them that's like wants to hear it. You know what I'm saying? Like that's the reason why like the videos of Africans being murdered by the police or being murdered by vigilantes like go viral, because people are like, oh, that's terrible, I want to see. It's just an indication of like a deeply reactionary and barbaric society, where this kind of spectacle of suffering is like accepted and people like seek it out, and it's very strange. So yeah, I think it's just like a symptom of capitalism, a symptom of our exploitation, of colonization of Africa, of the exploitation of African people. It's part of it. So yeah. But a thing I wanted to talk about was the context of why Fannie Lou Hamer was making that speech about what had happened to her in the prison when she was arrested, was that she was speaking at the Democratic National Convention. They were seeking to have delegates from the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party accepted within the DNC, and so that was like why she was testifying. And the whole strategy of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party was that African people in the southern part of the United States were not getting true representation within the Democratic Party. They had like, senators, representatives elected that were like racist Europeans that had no intention of representing African people. And so the strategy that SNCC and the civil rights workers were pursuing in the US South was to organize independent African political power. The Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party was intended to be a vehicle for building independent African political power. And so although Fannie Lou Hamer was organizing alongside SNCC organizers around the right to vote, around electoral strategy, I feel like it's really important to understand how it was different and actually more radical than how we engage electoral politics today. Because what's happening today is that people are like, we need to get progressive Democratic, progressive people in the Democratic Party. We need to find our way within the Democratic Party and like get them to align with the true interests of the masses of working class people, of African people. But what we have seen, I have seen it, I'm sure you have seen it, revolutionary African people clearly see it, but a lot of people don't, is that the Democratic Party is not accountable to the masses of working class people. The Democratic Party has no interest whatsoever in representing the masses of African people. The Democratic Party, just like the Republican Party, is a party of the ruling class. So like, what do you think about this strategy of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and of building independent political power versus trying to get a seat at the table within the Democratic Party?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it was different than what is going on, was going on then, but also we see it now, unfortunately, too. So, that's because, to me, I think even George Jackson talked about it. I mean, like, obviously we want the party to be focused on a socialist party if we were going to do that, but at the very least, it needs to be separate from the Democratic Party, like, and obviously the fucking Republican Party too, because there's just they're two sides of the same coin. It's not like I think we all hear it's not a two-party system. It's a one-party system with two sides that you can choose from, and they just polarize themselves on like 2 or 3 various issues like that, and they get people to like, oh well, obviously I'm for abortion, so I'm for abortion rights for women, and so I got to stick with the Democratic Party because Republicans are trying to stop that. And so that's what they do. They polarize people on these two a few issues, and the rest of the shit they just like, they're the same people. And so I think it's important for us to we can't push the Democratic Party left. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So if we are going to try and build our own political party, then it has to be outside of that. And I think that's it was that, like you said, it was a radical thing for her to do, and for them to try and do that back then. Because today you see, we just get funneled by all of our leaders, our so-called leaders, into the Democratic Party. Like, hey, just vote for them, and eventually we might get the right people in, and we might get some change. So yeah.
Yep. And like, speaking of like the point you made that the Democrats are like never going to change, never going to be on our side. So like, Fannie Lou Hamer gave that testimony at the Democratic National Convention. The Mississippi Freedom Democratic delegation was there asking for full seats of their representatives so that the massive African people in the South could have actual representation. And guess what? The Democrats did. What the Democrats did was attempt to sabotage them the entire time, because they were like, why are these African people here making a ruckus? Like, we're trying to have a peaceful convention. Can y'all stop talking about how we brutalized you? So they were undermined from the very beginning. There were threats made against them and their supporters. There were threats to like withhold money from the movement, from SCLC. And ultimately, what the Democrats ended up doing was putting forward this quote unquote compromise that they came up with without even talking to the delegates from the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. But they're like, okay, instead of full seats, we're going to give you 2 seats, and then the rest of the seats will be filled with racist ass Democrats. So even though these African people organized long-term, pursued this strategy of building independent political parties, said, okay, we're here at your convention, we want actual representation, here are the people that the people we represent want. And the Democrats were like, no, thank you. We are not going to do that. We are going to undermine you at every turn. At every turn. These were Africans who were working within the system, who simply said, if you're going to be racist as hell and not truly represent us, we're going to form our own party, and this is who we want to represent us. And the Democrats said, no, thank you. So what does that show you? It shows you that what Rashad said is exactly right. These people have never been on our side. These people have no intention of being on our side. These people are not actually accountable to us. Biden got it. Biden promised like the whole world. Biden was like, there's gonna be free college. It's gonna be $2,000 checks. I'm gonna shut down COVID. I'm gonna unblock Cuba. Like he promised the world when he was campaigning, and then he got in there, and it was like, psych. What are you gonna do about it? He's worse. He's done nothing he promised, and he's like blatant about it because these people are not accountable to us. They don't work for us. It doesn't matter that you keep voting for them. They don't actually care. They do not care. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, my bad. Yeah, and that's so like one thing, going back to the pain thing. So like, they supposedly she taught folks with her pain, but you see who don't care. Supposedly George Floyd changed the world, but this motherfucker Joe Biden gonna say, "Oh, I'm gonna give the police more money. Right? They need more money." So these motherfuckers don't make no sense. they do. They're just lying, and they know people are gonna buy it for a little bit, as long as it takes for them to get where they want to get, and then it's over after that. So yeah, that's all I'll say that.
And then there's folks in the chat going in on Adam Clayton Powell and John Lewis. John Lewis, famously a member of SNCC, who, like, Fannie Lou Hamer was left, Kwame Ture was left. John Lewis was like, I'm going over here, I'm going to the right. So John Lewis, I don't know this history, but Ricky, comrade from Hood Communists and Black Alliance for Peace, is saying that John Lewis and Adam Clayton Powell were like instrumental in the sabotage the Democratic Party carried out against the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party at the 1964 convention. And I believe it. John Lewis sold his soul. Also, Ricky is saying the cussing is refreshing. I'm trying to control my mouth, but you're bringing
Yeah, my bad. You're right. No,
you're good. I feel like one of us should. Okay, cool. So yeah, thank you, Ricky, for sharing that. I'm not surprised. I am not surprised. John Lewis defined himself.
Oh yeah, she become.
What's that? Oh, you froze for a second. So yeah, John Lewis defined himself by
My
being
bad. It was good.
All his like contemporaries, including Kwame Ture and Fannie Lou Hamer. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, yeah, Ricky be coming through with the info always.
Yes, she does. And yeah, also on the pain thing about how they like want to see it, blah, blah, blah. The other thing about it though, specifically focusing on her and her choice to do that, is that I feel like African women are expected to like bear a lot of pain and be quiet about it. Not like make a ruckus, not like walk away. And so her choosing to say, this is what happened to me. I'm going to explain it in detail. I'm going to talk about the African men that participated. I'm going to talk about the police who watched. I'm going to talk about why it happened. Was like a very, very powerful choice when you consider, they usually expect us to like just take it and be quiet. So her refusing to do that, her like forcing people to listen to what had happened to her, I do not respect a society that needs to make a spectacle out of the suffering of African and colonized people, but I do respect her as an African woman being like, you are going to listen to what happened to me. I am not going to say this was my fault. I am not going to be quiet about it. I am not going to accept it. You are going to listen to what happened to me. And then the other thing about her that was left out of the documentary is just like her commitment to self-defense and like community defense. Like there's that famous quote about how the racist comes up on her porch wanting problems, how she'll like blow them away. I'm paraphrasing. But like, yeah, it was just like an African woman who stood up for herself, stood up for her people, refused to be quiet about what was happening and about how messed up with us. And I feel like that's a very, very important example as well.
Yeah, definitely. Because, yeah, like you said, this society expects Black women to just, that's what you guys do, right? You guys are just strong and you guys take the brunt of every fucking body, basically in the world. And you're just supposed to that's what you all do, that's what y'all do. It's normal. You just take it and, be quiet because that's what you guys are here for. Exactly. So I think that was important. Yeah. Like you said, it's important for her to say, nah, fuck that. You guys are going to listen to me say what happened to me and how these fucking traitors beat me, how these traitors beat me, how these Black men beat the shit out of me because they got paid by the cops. And so yeah, exactly.
So let's get into the Assata movie, and we can certainly keep talking about Fannie if we want to like pull her in, because there's many places where they intersect. But so for the Assata interview, just 20 minutes long, but it was like packed. It was packed full of like gems, full of like clear perspectives on how she understands the world and what she sees being the issues of the world that like I strongly agree with. So starting off, she talks about her like awakening, like what saved her is how she frames it. And when she says saved her is like being part of the struggle, being part of the movement, joining a political organization, engaging in a process of study about the conditions and history of her people and about what the solutions are, applying what she had learned in that study to like actual work in the community, and then learning from that experience that like the model of success that we are sold by the society, that we gotta like, you know, get our piece of the pie, we gotta like climb up the ladder and seek to be part of the system exploiting us, how she learned that that was never going to be the way. So like thoughts about that perspective from Assata on like the struggle saving her.
Yeah, I think that's like, to me, one of the most important things about, I mean, because that's, to me, isn't that what her name means? Like the woman who struggles or something like that. I think that's what Assata means. And so like I guarantee that that's like the most important thing for her, joining the movement and stuff like that. Because like she said, what this country tries to make us feel like is that we can't survive without getting high or consuming or doing stuff like that. And so, when you start fighting for your people and stuff like that, you have a place. And that's why I honestly believe that, like, a lot of the ways in which imperialism and capitalism makes the society sick, it leads to all the things, like it leads to people dying of overdoses, and crime and stuff like that. And people are insecure about their place in this world because we see what's going on. And so once you start fighting for your people, you're grounded in something, and you have a goal to reach, and you know that there is no stopping. And so I don't know, the power in that, and how that and you're like actually able to believe in something, you know what I mean? And so I can just imagine that is, how it changed her, and how important that was to join a movement and to really start affecting the way the world is structured and stuff like that. And there was mistakes, and that they didn't end up doing exactly what they wanted to do, but the shit, we already know how important the Black Panthers were and the Black Liberation Army were for our people and for the struggle for liberation in general, because it's a continuous process, and that was one step in the process. So yeah,
I agree. And there's a part where she says the struggle gave me more than I could ever give to the struggle. And I like, considering what she went through, right? Like she was framed for murder. She was locked up and tortured, including while she was pregnant. She made like remarkable sacrifices. She suffered an intense amount of repression for fighting for her people, and she still has the perspective that the struggle gave her more than she could ever give back to the struggle. And like, I do not find that surprising, because I find it to be like, I deeply relate to and agree with that. Like, the organizing work is like another full-time job on top of my already full-time job. So it's like 80 hours a week of my life, usually more. And like, it's like exhausting. It like is stressful. It's very stressful. It makes you like question yourself and like push yourself. It's a lot. It's a lot to give. And I still feel like the person I have become by engaging in political work on a collective basis, by engaging in a process of political education, by like applying the ideas I learned alongside other people in our community, like it has transformed me in like such a positive way that I don't even know Like if I had not been part of this process, I would have been like a Beyonce feminist. I would have been like, I'm gonna climb the ladder and make a lot of money, blah 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 blah. You know what I'm saying? Like looking up to people like Hillary Clinton. If I had not been awoken and transformed by this process. And so I feel like it's always like a hard sell to recruit people when you talk about how much work it is, when you talk about what the commitment is. But I feel like if people actually understood what we gain when we commit to collective liberation, that everybody would choose to do it. The problem is that we live in a society that pushes this individualist mindset, this extremely toxic consumption-focused culture that convinces people that the highest expression of who they are is like how much they own or how much money they make. And it's really sad. It's really sad that that's where we're at, because we need so many more people in the movement. And I have optimism, eternal optimism about getting the people we need to win this movement. But I also am just like, man, we're so lost. Like that's why people are depressed, anxious, constantly traumatized, being forced into like toxic habits, because we live in a society that's broken, that's backwards, that's reactionary, that's teaching us to be antisocial. And like, there is another way. There is another way. So yeah.
I'm weak that you said Beyonce feminism. I like that. Was
I was first on. That was my trajectory. It was terrible. I fully own, like 10 years ago, I kind of sucked, because that's what I was taught to aspire to. My God. Okay, so yeah, she talks about being part of the struggle and that saving her, the necessity of bringing all of our people along. Like he asked her, the person interviewing her asked her about like, what do we do about the youth who are incarcerated, who are being abandoned by our communities? Like, what do we do? And she's like, we have to bring them with us. We have to bring them into the movement. We can't forget them. We can't allow the system to dehumanize them. We can't think about them the same way that the people oppressing and exploiting us do. And that's like really powerful. But another thing that she said that really stood out to me was when she talked about the necessity of connecting the struggles of oppressed people all around the world. So like Assata identifies as an African woman. She said it several times. The Black Panther Party was obviously like a revolutionary African nationalist organization focused on the liberation of our people. But the Black Panther Party was also like had a deeply internationalist politic. Like they were fighting for African people, they were developing political programs for African people, but they were also going to the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, and building relationships. They were going to Vietnam, they were going to Cuba, they were going to Algeria, they were going all over the world and building connections across movements, because they understood that the struggles of oppressed peoples all around the world are connected, which is like something that's very, very different from where we're at right now. So like, what do you think about that, Rashad?
Yeah, I think the internationalism is what makes what the movement needs at all times, to be connected to the struggles of people, of oppressed and colonized people all over the world. So we obviously always want to stay connected with the people of Palestine, and it's just important because our situation is an international situation, and so to think that we can just fight here without any support, even though that like history shows us that it's been our fight here connected with international support and pressure that's helped us solve problems. And so and then it's important for the colonized people around the world to know that we support them also. It's not like they just support us, but that we support them, because we already know how America likes to make us think. I mean, we're separated. They try and separate us in our own country. And so it is so important it's so important for us to understand that we can't be separated from the people who are going through some of the same exact things that we're going through, have, like Assata said, have the same exact foot on their neck as ours. And so they need to know that they're not being left out of our consciousness and in our minds too, because we're all in this shit together. And so, yeah, because because it's always the American exceptionalism and we can internalize that too and be like, oh well, no, they need to always support us, and we don't give it back. And so that's, we can't be doing shit like that. So yeah, the internationalist element of the movement has to be always present and has to be strong. And we always have to be making these connections with the people struggling against imperialism and capitalism in their own societies and neocolonialism and all that kind of bullshit. So yeah.
Yeah, and 2022, our people have internalized a lot of American exceptionalism. Like there was a TikTok video that went viral this past week where this African woman in law school put on a fake ass hood accent and then proceeded to like just regurgitate the NATO line on Ukraine. Talking about, I was like, oh my God, what'd she say? She said Big Daddy Biden, Big Bang Putin, talking about oh my God. It was like, I was like, what do you do? Have some self-respect. But so she was like, just regurgitating the NATO line. Like Russia's point blank not trying to invade Ukraine. They are not trying to invade Ukraine. Even Ukraine is like, Russia's not trying to invade. Can y'all chill? And the United States is like, Russia's trying to invade Ukraine. So like, she basically just repeated what Joe Biden, what Ned Price have been saying for the past like 3-4 months, like the bald-faced lies. This is an African woman repeating this in our vernacular in a clear attempt to spread imperialist propaganda to like African youth that are on TikTok. And I was like, who told you to do it? Like, who paid you to do this? The Democrats. But like, it was just really wild because like I thought about like, Huey P. Newton going to the DPRK. I thought about Kwame Ture going to Vietnam. I thought about, Assata living in Cuba free and like defending the Cuban Revolution. And I'm like, how is it that we went from like this and Fannie Lou Hamer traveling to Guinea to meet with Sekou Touré? Like, how did we go from this clear legacy of internationalism where we understood the liberation struggle of African people in the United States as intrinsically connected to the liberation struggles of oppressed people all over the world, where we understood that any resistance against imperialism anywhere on this planet, any resistance to the US empire anywhere on this planet was good for us. And we were clear about that. And it didn't just start in the 60s. It is an old political tendency. The 20th century and beyond, there were always African people on the front lines resisting imperialism. And now in 2022, we have young African women spitting out NATO talking points on TikTok. We have someone else this morning in the Hood Communist group chat, Comrade shared another TikTok of another African woman in like fatigues, like twerking she said she was twerking to distract the Russians.
Like,
what is going on? What is going on? What is going on? So yes, it's just people like hold up the Panthers. People like big up the Panthers. Like to this day, there's like a deep respect and admiration for the Black Panther Party within our people, within our community, because we know that they were for us, regardless of what the United States empire says about them. But it's like surface level in that we like what they look like. We like the like militancy, but we're not actually like listening to what they're saying or like studying what they were doing. So now we're going to distract the Russians.
Yeah, like I'm sorry to cut you off, but yeah, exactly. I think it was on the Black Myths podcast on BPM, and they're talking about like it's the aesthetics that people like. They like the all black. They like the guns. They like the posturing and stuff like that. They like the aesthetics. They don't really care about the politics. And it's like frustrating to me. That's like one of the most frustrating things because like how can you celebrate these people on the day that they were murdered, their birthdays and stuff like that, put pictures and little comments and stuff like that, and not actually like want to go and study what they said. But they don't even want to. I'm telling you, we don't even want to do that for Martin Luther King, who is we all everyone loves, all of us love. And so like if we won't even go read Dr. King, to me it's silly and it hurts. Like it hurts, but it's so I don't know. It hurts.
It's bad out here. It's bad out here. But there were also like, Black Alliance for Peace is a coalition
Exactly.
of organizations that exist that are fighting back on the front lines of the fight against imperialism in 2022, and they were like, "Fuck is that?" They were on it. So like, even when there are people doing this ridiculous stuff, there are also segments of our people pushing back, taking that clear internationalist line, that clear anti-imperialist line. We just have to grow the number of us that are like saying, "Stop doing that. Have some self-respect." And we just have to grow the number that are telling the truth, that are refusing to accept the NATO line, that understand very clearly who the enemy is. So yeah, it's very, very important. And so yeah, the Black Panther Party is an example of the kind of internationalism that Assata was talking about. But also Cuba itself, that's where the interview was conducted, is also an example. Because like I said, Assata joined the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army. She was framed for the murder of a state trooper on the New Jersey Turnpike. There was no physical evidence whatsoever that she was actually the one that shot the trooper. All the evidence actually pointed to friendly fire killing that guy, but they framed her. They framed Sundiata Acoli. So they locked her up. They put her in a men's prison. They tortured her. She got pregnant. They continued to torture her. But the movement, her comrades in the Black Liberation Army, organized, broke her out, got her out of the United States into Cuba. Cuba took her in. Cuba gave her asylum, and she has been living there free for decades at this point. I believe she's like in her 70s now. So this, and also that Cuba taking in Assata was like not a one-time thing. There were actually dozens of African and oppressed revolutionaries. They were able to take refuge in Cuba for quite a long time. And what's not really discussed is that Cuba got like a lot of shit from the United States for doing that. There were many, many, many times where the US was like, if you want us to loosen the blockade, you have to give her up. And Cuba was like, we are never going to do that. In fact, Barack Obama made the latest such request. So many, many times the United States tried to extort the Cuba into giving up Assata. Many, many times Cuba tightened sanctions, or the United States tightened sanctions against Cuba in order to convince them to give up Assata. They never did. They said it was completely off the table. And that example of Cuba's solidarity with Africans in the United States is exemplary of how Cuba has shown up on this planet. Like Cuba has sent doctors, money, soldiers all over the world to support anti-colonial struggles, to support nations resisting imperialism. Cuba has suffered drastic consequences for that solidarity from the United States, and Cuba to this day is continuing to do that. So I feel like if you look at like actually revolutionary nations, projects, organizations, whether they are African or otherwise, you're going to find consistently this politics of internationalism, this politics of solidarity across borders. Like that is a feature of revolutionary socialists and anti-colonial movements, and it always has been.
Yeah, Cuba, it's like so fucking wild to me. When I think about what a Cuba has been able to accomplish under dude, that was 1959, or so what was it? 2 years after that, when Fidel started nationalizing all the stuff in the country, and the sanctions came. Dude, that shit is wild, and the consistent and principled internationalist mindset of that country is insane. Like, I mean, not insane, but like it's beautiful to think about. Because like you said, the soldiers, the medics, the schooling that they've allowed people from our country to go and learn in their country. Obviously, keeping Assata in our revolution, some of our revolutionaries safe, and not capitulating to some bullshit ass thing to extradite her to America. That's nonsense. And just to like the principles of that, to like consistently be bombarded with death threats and sanctions that cripple your own people's way of life, and and it threatens the own safety of your country, because we know how what the sanctions did to people in Cuba, and how it affected them, and how some of them ended up getting so frustrated from being starved by the American sanctions that they left, and some of them blamed Cuba. And so we know that was what America was trying to do, sow unrest and to destabilize that beautiful nation. And for them to never quit, to never fold, a tiny poor nation like that, come on. And so, like, we owe Cuba, as we owe so many other organizations and nations of people who have continuously supported us in the fight for liberation in the world.
Agreed. And so this past week, actually it was last week, was the 60th anniversary of the U.S. blockade on Cuba. And to commemorate that and to like bring awareness to the ongoing act of genocide that the U.S. is carrying out against Cuba, this website, the National Security Archive, released like this collection of declassified documents all about how the U.S. blockade on Cuba was developed. Hold on, let me finish typing and then I'll put it in the chat, because it's hard to like type and talk. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so they released this like archive of documents. It's like literally declassified documents from like the U.S. State Department, from the Department of the Treasury, from the Executive Office, etc., all talking about how the U.S. developed this policy towards Cuba. And there's like several parts in these documents where they're like, oh, Cuba's in Angola, Cuba's in Ethiopia, heighten the blockade. Like they straight up say, make it worse because Cuba's over here helping these people. Like there's several documents that lay that out throughout the decades. That it was like the heightening of the sanctions against Cuba, the tightening of the blockade against Cuba was oftentimes in response to Cuban internationalism. And Cuba knows this. There are so many ways they could compromise to get the U.S. off their backs. They could give up Assata. They could privatize industries. They could do all of these things to get the U.S. off their backs, and Cuba refuses to compromise the principles of their revolution. That is why Assata is still safe. That is why, even though the U.S. is trying to starve them to death, Cuba is like, we will not give up socialism for you. We are going to find a way to take care of our people regardless, no matter what you do to us. So I feel like, please check out that link. Please check out those documents. Understand the sacrifice that Cuba made for internationalism. Understand how like core internationalism is to a truly revolutionary politic. Like we have to have solidarity across borders to build the kind of world that Assata was talking about. So yeah. What did anything come up? Go ahead.
Oh, no. I'll just say one thing about so Che Guevara's daughter just did a interview with Breakthrough News, and she was talking about just the sacrifice of like, for one, her dad, because she was like, I barely saw my dad because he was always gone helping. He went, I think he left to fight in Algeria in like 19, I can't remember, but yeah, I think he went to a fight in Algeria, and she hadn't seen him after that. And so she talked about that, but she also talked about the doctors and stuff like that, and the shit that they do for the whole world is just, I mean, she talked about how they they were in Africa when Ebola broke out, and how they're still sending things to COVID stuff to people now when they can't even really get access to needles and stuff like that. It's nonsense. But yeah, I'll just end there.
Yeah, I saw that interview too, and it was incredible. So yeah, last thing I want to talk about before we wrap it up was just the whole part of the interview where Assata is talking about the necessity of supporting political prisoners and incarcerated people in general, and the political prisoners, like the African elders at this point who are incarcerated in concentration camps across the United States for the so-called crime of fighting for our liberation as a people. Like, those are our actual heroes. Those are our actual veterans. Like, the veterans of U.S. imperialist interventions are not our veterans. They are not our heroes. Our actual heroes are people like Mumia, people like Jamil Al-Amin, people like Sundiata Acoli, these folks who are still locked up, who are dying because of the neglect that they are getting in these facilities, who made this great sacrifice fighting for our liberation, who have largely been forgotten by our people. Those are actual heroes. And we have a responsibility to like fight for them, to honor them. But she also says, like, the masses of our people, like our youth, women, queer and trans people, our brothers who are locked up, we have to fight for them as well. There's a part where she's like, this system like dehumanizes them. This system like hates them, spits on them. We cannot look at them the same way as this system does. We cannot say that because an African person has committed a crime within a system that's built on a foundation of crime and theft and murder should be abandoned to that system. So what do you think about that, Rashad?
Yeah, to me, that was, I'm not going to say that was like the most important thing, but that's what I gravitated towards the most, especially, you know, the women in prison thing, that shit. It gets to me. And the political prisoner thing, obviously, and prisoners in general. Yes. So like, you know, that when she started talking about that, like it really gets to me because like you said, those are our heroes. I mean, I think about Matula Shakur, who's still in jail. I mean, obviously, all the ones you mentioned. Matula Shakur is still in jail right now. My dude used to give acupuncture to people to help relieve to help try and stop addiction and stuff like that. And the Sundiata Acoli was a math wizard and stuff like that. And these people fought for our own liberation, and they're rotting in jail. And it's just like so unfortunate, and it's sad because they, you know, most of the time, I'm sure most of them were framed. We all know Mamia's bullshit was bullshit. Sundiata Acoli didn't shoot that cop on the New Jersey Turnpike. What the fuck did Matula Shakur do? Come on, bro. Like, it's just Jamil Alameen case is nonsense. It's nonsense. All of it is nonsense. And so, like what she said, there should be a movement. I mean, there is, but you know, we need the movement to be stronger for people. They were victims of a whole intelligence program that they admit halfway that they know they were spying and given trumped up charges and faking stuff and spying and all this nonsense. They admit it at least as such. They haven't gone into depths. Like she said, there's files that are heavily redacted. But even in those heavily redacted files, you see that what was going on is against their law, and let alone against the fact that we have a right to self-determination and to free ourselves from the bonds of colonialism, because we are an internal colony. And so, yeah, that's prisoners and leave. We can't leave. We should be for abolition. We want the prisons gone, and we want people out of the prisons. Plain and simple, because it's immoral, and they're not trying to rehabilitate these people supposedly for the crime of being victimized by the system. They're not trying to do that, and so we need the prisons abolished, and we need prisoners out. Most of the prisoners haven't done anything violent anyway. A lot of the prisoners haven't even been convicted. There's people sitting there haven't even been convicted of crimes, and they had to sit in there because they can't pay bail, and so. That has to be an important and integral part of the movement, abolition of prisons, because that is slave labor. They are working for free. They are working for basically nothing. They are being put into dangerous situations. They are being held captive like animals in solitary confinement. It's unconscionable, and so we need them out. And obviously, political prisoners are foremost on our mind because like she said, they're conscious and they're able to politicize the reasons why they are in the prisons and why they were victims of it. But we need the totality. So yeah.
Agreed. And then Ricky's saying in this chat, Assata said they don't want to get rid of the problem; they want to get rid of the people. And there's a part in the interview where she straight up says, like, you know, some of the people that are locked up did actually do it. Some of the people that are locked up did commit violent acts, and that still doesn't mean we throw them away. That still doesn't mean that we get to discard them or like give them up to the system. That actually means that we need to engage in this process of individual and collective transformation and bring them with us, period. Like we live in a society built on a foundation of incredible violence, of abuse, of antisocial behavior, of theft, of exploitation. And so living within that context, getting that messaging, that individualist and toxic messaging, means that it is inevitable that we are going to cause harm at all kinds of different levels. And if we say that anybody that caused harm cannot come along in the freedom struggle, it's going to be like maybe like 2 people at best in that movement. What we have to do is engage in a process of transformation. Bring them with us. Understand that this society causes harm and we are fighting to destroy it and build something better in its place, and everybody has a role to play. Everybody, regardless of what they've done wrong or not. So yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, there was an interview the other night on Thursday. Dr. Sundiata Chachajua, Sundiata Keita Chajua, and so with Dr. CBS, and he asked the question, how do we stop? You know, we obviously know that the right wing and the liberals grab onto the black on black crime bullshit, but he asked, how do we get the gun violence and stuff like that to stop in our communities? And so like I in Denver, people probably wouldn't believe it, but I grew up, you know, there's a lot of gang activity around here. So I grew up a lot around gang activity and stuff like that. So to me, it's just like the people who do stuff like that might end up in jail and stuff like that. And our so-called lumpen proletariat, I believe that once we build the movement strong enough, they want to join. We want to, you know, they want to be part of something bigger. That's why they're in the gangs. You know what I mean? Because it gives them a sense of being a part of something. And we built the movement to something that's strong and that resonates throughout the country. I guarantee you, they'll be the first motherfuckers to join up, and they'll be the most steadfast and principled people when you get them to learn and read, because they already understand how the system wants to destroy them. They already kind of understand. All you need to do is push them into a direction that's constructive and focus on the actual enemy. Because right now we have, you know, we're around each other and we're focused on each other. Okay. Once we build the movement, we're able to direct their attention into what the real enemy, because they know the cops and shit is the real enemy. They know it, but they don't have any structure to guide them in the right way. And so once we start building that shit, I already know, and they're gonna be our most principled people and our most steadfast warriors, because they know what the fuck they're doing. And yeah.
Thank you so much. I 100% agree. So we're a little bit over time, so we're going to start to wrap it up now. I want to know if you had any final thoughts you wanted to share.
I love when we delve into the women of our movement, because we already know the importance that you guys play into everything that we do. And so, you know, lifting up people like Fannie Lou Hamer and Assata and Sophia Bakari and Claudia Jones and people like that, it's important. People from Africa, like Tatina Sia, and it's just important because we have to understand that the movement is collective and stuff like that. And so it's not just men, it's not just women, it's not just straight people, it's not just people, binary people, it's not just cishet people, you know what I mean? It's all of us. It's not just able-bodied folks, it's all of us, and we all gonna play a role, and we all gonna do what we gotta do to move us to liberation. And so we need all of us. And so yeah.
Yep. And people like to say hashtag like listen to Black women. And what I've found is that when people say that, they mean like a particular kind of Black woman. They don't mean like a revolutionary nationalist African woman. They don't mean like a socialist African woman. They don't mean like a radical organizer African woman. They mean like Kamala Harris. So I feel like what we have done with this month's film series is like actually hashtag listen to Black women. And what I mean by that is that we like studied their lives, talked about what they believe, talked about the strategies they applied. And so I would say if you're like watching this program and you're one of those people that likes to say like listen to Black women, it's not enough to just like look at a Black woman in a position of power exploiting people and be like, oh, this is the right color face in this position, so I support Black women. No, like actually study our politics, actually study what we believe, actually study what we've done, listen to what we're actually motherfucking saying. That's what we need to do. So this has been the February edition of the Pan-African Film Series. Thank you so much for joining us. We do this on the second Saturday of every single month, which means we'll be back next month on March 12th, same time, same place, new films. So we hope that you will join us for the March edition, and also that you will join us for Weekly Pan-African News in 2 weeks. We hope that you have a great rest of your Saturday and stay ready for revolution.